The reason we're here is to hear Mr. Goyette. All of us have been looking forward to this evening. Well, actually, let me thank two people. Jacques, would you stand up? He's the meetup organizer for the Austrian economics group, and he was critical in getting to the So thank you, Jacques. Otherwise, like I said, Mr. Goyette has been on national TV, national radio, a variety of things, a very long, very interesting history on what he's done so far. But I feel that we've scored somewhat of a coup. 10 days ago, he formed a national radio program with Ron Paul. They're speaking for 1 hour a day, every day of the week. And we are literally one of the first people to hear him speak after that privately. And so I just feel we're very, very fortunate to have him speaking to us this evening. With that in mind, please join me in welcoming Mr. Goyette to speak.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. As we say in radio, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
I'm honored to be here, invited to speak about Austrian economics because I'm not an economist. So, but it's a nice feather to be able to say, well, they invited me to speak about Austrian economics. But I will tell you, actually, Austrian economics is a really nice antidote to one of the real maladies of our time. I'm older than many of you, most of you here. But at the time I was in school, had they offered something like Austrian economics, I might have actually taken an economics degree and then had, a pretext to be here and speak to you. But at the time, economics was all about, phony formulas and made-up statistics and all this stuff. And of course, the Austrians were out there, but the universities really didn't acknowledge them. And so there was no such thing as a really humane, human being-centered study of economics. It was like that. It was like that in the academic world about virtually everything, at least in my era. Psychology, you would think psychology would be the study of the human psyche, right? But instead it was the study of, flatworms and chickens and their behavior. And I think, flatworms are really nice creatures, but they don't go a long way to explain the inspiration of Beethoven or the genius of Shakespeare. So it kind of left me out, and that's what economics was much like that at the time. But I guess there is a reason for it. Human beings are very impressionable, and there are appeals to authority that work with them. And of course, the human race had been demonstrably impressed with the achievements of the natural sciences, of chemistry and engineering and all of these things that have made such huge leaps in the way that human beings lived. And at the time, at the time that I'm talking about, that Austrian economics should have been in the ascendancy, there were things like the Suez Canal, and there was the transatlantic cable, and there were all these engineering achievements, and telephones and electricity and radio, and all these things were going on. And so all of the psycho and social sciences wanted to emulate the natural sciences. And if it couldn't be counted and if it couldn't be weighed and measured, then it wasn't a fit study for any of the sciences. And they all preened around in laboratory coats like they were, real scientists in the natural sciences, but they were scientists of the psycho and social sciences, and they were trying to fake their way. And I remember once in school reading somebody, and it might have been in economics or sociology, this long, confusing explanation of some theory that he'd come up with that explained something, and he was talking about human beings as having social valences. Now, I didn't do that great in chemistry, but I know that valences actually mean something in chemistry. And then in the social science, it was just made up. It was pretense, it was aping the natural sciences, and this is what was going on at the time I was in school. So I'm academically bereft as far as economics goes, but I will tell you that the great Austrian school economists of the last century are Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek, the Nobel Prize winner, and Murray Rothbard. And I've spoken for the Mises Institute several times about the sorts of things that I'm here to speak with you about. I knew Murray Rothbard very well. I'd had him in town to speak at economic conferences. I actually hired him as a speaker sometimes. I had him on the radio. One night I kept him on the radio for 2 hours at the wee hours of the morning. And I don't think anybody else knew what, anybody else was really interested, but I couldn't let him go. We don't hold guests for 2 hours on the radio. But I did with Murray Rothbard. And Friedrich Hayek, well, I got to hold his Nobel Prize that he was awarded in the 1970s. And so I feel like I have a connection with him. And then the most visible exponent of Austrian economics today, of course, is former Congressman and Presidential candidate Ron Paul. And Greg is right that we actually launched a program this week that I co-host with Ron Paul, but it's just commentaries. It's twice a day, short radio commentaries about the issues of the day. I always found that, if I was lucky, I flipped around TV and maybe Ron Paul would be on Cavuto, or maybe, he was on Piers Morgan or something. I'd just be, and then I'd stumble by, just changing channels, and go, oh, there's Ron Paul, and I'd watch him. But now he's going to be on radio stations all over the country. In the morning and in the afternoon, you go about your regular routine. You're driving to work, or you shave, or whatever. You take the kids to school, you pick them up, you go, and he's going to be on commenting on the issues of the day twice a day, morning and afternoon. And we rolled it out on Monday, and we just started. I mean, we started on Monday, and we're already well over 100 radio stations. So, yeah, thank you. Well, those are my ties, I guess, to Austrian economics. You can decide for yourself whether whether I do a good job in presenting it to you tonight, but I will talk about the parts of this very rich field that have been important to me. And the first one is the critique of socialism that Austrian economics makes. The next one is the Austrian business cycle theory. The third one is central economic planning. And then I'll talk a little bit about the current state of the economy, and in that, implicit in there, I think I'll be able to fold in some stuff about, at least from the perspective of the Austrian school, about the nature of money and our current economic crisis. So the first thing I think was so important was in 1920 when Ludwig von Mises published his critique of socialism. And it's very simple, really. Well, you could read it, but maybe it's not that simple, but it is astoundingly clear. Why can't socialism work? And he said, well, socialism doesn't know how to prioritize any work. Socialism doesn't know how to allocate any assets. Everything's very confused. Why is that? Because it's public ownership of the means of production and so on, and there are no prices. There's no means to calculate. How do you know if this use is better than that? How do you know if this demand is greater than that demand? How do you know if this use it satisfies more people or that? Should you use metal pipes or should you use concrete pipes? How do you know? You don't know. There's no basis for calculation, and socialism has to fail as a consequence. And actually, his critique was so clear that it rattled the entire world of academic socialists. And they began to come up with, well, they had to figure out a way to refute him, so they started coming up with, well, we can calculate on the trial and error method. We'll try this, and then if it's not quite right, we'll try something else, and we'll try this allocation of resources, and so on. And then they came out with, one I really liked, they came up with the imputation of values. So they didn't have any real way to value resources, so they started to impute them, to pretend that they knew based on something that they saw somewhere else. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, American economists went over there and they went to visit the economic planners in the Kremlin, and they looked in their offices and stuff, and they had things like the Sears catalog that they used as a means of trying to at least figure out what the value of a tractor was compared to the value of a temporary structure outbuilding or something. I mean, because they had no way of computing these things on their own. So those were some of the sorts of things that Mises critiqued, and has not been answered since then. And of course, we've seen a spectacular failure of socialism around the world. It has been replaced by the next thing they tried, which is sort of a market socialism, which means, it's still state control. There's, okay, so private people can own private businesses, but they're under our command, and we'll tell them, we'll tell them what they can do. And, one of the things they'll really do is if they're crony capitalists under state control, then when they make profits, they get to keep them, and then when they take losses, we get to pay for those.
Right.
So that's modern American socialism, and the critique of socialism of Ludwig von Mises is the first, I think, one of the most important steps in modern Austrian economics. The next one is the Austrian business cycle theory. Now, the business cycle has bedeviled capitalism from the days of the Industrial Revolution. You know, the series of endless booms and busts, and we've lived through it, and the unemployment and dislocations, and you know, you save and you try to prepare for the future, and then all of a sudden you're unemployed for a long time, and you know, prices up, prices down, you lose your... Was it a problem endemic to capitalism, the business cycle, the booms and busts? Well, it appeared at about the time of industrialization, and so it was widely believed, and Karl Marx insisted that this was inherent in capitalism, and this is the reason that capitalism and free economies can't last, and we have to be in charge because of the business cycle. And the business cycle gave a toehold to a guy by the name of John Maynard Keynes, who was a British economist, and he is the father of what is the default economics of the world today. And for lack of a better term, since he was the guy that created it, I guess, we call it Keynesianism or Keynesian economics. And everybody, virtually everybody, in positions of authority in this country and others are Keynesian economics. And what does that mean? Well, it means that they all subscribe to the same theory, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. Now, wait a minute, let me get this straight. We have a debate in this country, we have elections, we have contests over things, and yet we get the same economic theory, whether we elect Mitt Romney or Barack Obama. We get the same, we get the ghost of our Lord Keynes presiding over our economic affairs. Well, yeah, the answer is yes. It's been that way for a long time. And in the early 1970s, Richard Nixon said, to the great relief of the intellectual and media establishment of America, said, well, don't worry about me because I'm now a Keynesian in economics. And they all go, oh, he's not some whack job, he's a Keynesian. And since then, I mean, virtually without doubt, all of the elected officials and governing classes in this country, the rare exceptions you can count on one hand, basically by the presuppositions of Keynesian economics. Now, that's not to say that any of them are steeped in intellectual Keynesianism, or that they really know anything about what Keynes wrote and what Keynes said. But they find it a very useful academic cover for what they want to do anyway. And what they want to do anyway is spend money they don't have to buy favors, to win friends, to reward constituencies, and to get reelected. So they buy this Keynesian business of spending our way to prosperity and so on, or in the words of Harry Hopkins, who was FDR's aide, you know, it's spend and spend, tax and tax, elect and elect. The people are too damn dumb to understand.
It's true.
So
That's true.
So in the economic depression, Keynes came over and pitched his theory, and FDR entertained him, and Keynes said later FDR wasn't that bright, really didn't get it, but you know, FDR wanted to spend and elect himself, and so he implemented the theories of John Maynard Keynes, which Keynes said, by the way, are more suitable really for a totalitarian government. The addition to his works in German, his general theories, his seminal book in German, say, this is great, we're going to try this in the Nazi economy of Germany because this is, my theories of economics are more suited to statist totalitarian schools like Keynes. Anyway, Keynes said basically that in a recession, in a downturn, in a calamity, in a depression, the government should act like a flywheel to stabilize the economy. So if the consumers are dislocated and they don't have money and they don't have jobs and they're not spending, the government should make up for it by spending itself, even if it doesn't have the money. And this is the economics that prevails today. We'll spend our ways into unbelievable deficits, regardless of where the money comes from. By and by, when we die, we'll figure out how we pay for it, but now we'll spend our way into deep debt. So, here is from John Maynard Keynes' seminal book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. Here is an example, and I pulled this out just so you will understand exactly what we're talking about when we talk about Keynesian economics. He says, if the Treasury were to fill up old bottles with banknotes, with cash, if the Treasury were to fill up old used bottles with banknotes and bury them in suitable depths in disused coal mines that are then filled up to the surface with the town rubbish, and then leave it to private enterprise on well-tried principles of laissez-faire to dig the notes up again, the right to doing so being obtained, of course, by tendering for the leases of the note-bearing territory, then there need be no more unemployment. And with the help of the repercussions, the real economy of the community and its capitalist wealth also would probably be a good deal greater, actually, than it had been. Let me explain to you what he just said. You're going to take a bunch of cash, you're going to stuff it in old bottles, you're going to bury it and cover it with trash in the town dump, then you're going to leak word out that that cash is out there, and then there's going to be a surge of economic activity. People are going to travel to the town, they're going to rent hotel rooms or motel rooms, they're going to buy food at the local restaurant, they're going to buy shovels and pickaxes, and they're going to go out there and dig. And that restores our economic vitality. So that is in essence, from Keynes' own words, that is Keynesian economics that rules the United States today. But what it leaves unsaid is now, what if all of that activity of digging that hole and burying those banknotes had been used for something productive that actually created wealth? And that cash that they stuffed in those, bottles that they buried came from somewhere. Somebody had some plans for it. It could have been used for, like real productive things that make people more prosperous. And what about all of that economic labor? It wasn't building homes or infrastructure or anything that, makes the community better off. It was digging through a trash dump to find something that somebody had buried down there. And the shovels and stuff, the tools that they used were all tools then that had been diverted from real productive economic activity. And the worst thing, and the most galling thing of all in my view, is that you paid some mindless bureaucrat to come up with and administer this scheme. Now, all that money disappears from the economy instead of being used for things that are really productive, that create real wealth. But that was the essence of Keynesian economic theory. And it applied to the Great Recession, so that people aren't spending money, people are unemployed, but the government will spend money that it doesn't have, and then everything will recover, but the economy didn't recover. And Keynesian economics has been tried again and again and again. It was tried in the Great Depression, failed. The economy of the United States didn't recover until the end of the war. Oh, sure, the unemployment rate got better because you put, 12 million men in uniforms. But the standard of living fell. People were eating margarine instead of butter, and food was rationed, and you couldn't fill up your gas tank and go to Florida if you needed an operation or to get out of town because it was rationed. So the standard of living didn't increase, but there were 11 million men under arms. I mean, you could have hired them, by the same token, you could have hired them to turn big rocks into little rocks. And you could say the unemployment rate is better, but the economy didn't recover until after the war, and finally government spending collapsed. It fell, and it fell hard. And the Keynesian economists said, oh, you can't bring these people home from the war. You have millions of human beings. You just keep, we got to have a central plan. We've got to organize things. We got to bring them in slowly. We got to have big work projects run by the government, because we just the economy won't be able to figure out what to do with these people. But of course, the mothers and fathers, and the husbands and the kids, and so on, of the wives and the kids, and so on, of the service people wanted their family members home. And the politicians didn't want to stand in the way and get rolled over by that steamroller, so they let them come home. And government spending collapsed, and the economy exploded with such a boom as we haven't seen since. So, but that wasn't the only time the Keynesians have been wrong. Keynesians have been wrong about everything. In the 1970s, in the stagflation of the 1970s, they said, well, you can't have conditions of recession and unemployment if you just print a lot of money, because that's what we do. Hire people and spend money on government programs with money that we don't have, just print up the money and it'll be okay. So we got sky-high inflation in the 1970s that some of you will remember, and the recession persisted and unemployment got worse. So it didn't work then either. The Keynesian spending, the flywheel effect, didn't work. And it hasn't worked in the last event as well. So central banking creates, according to the Austrians, a serious problem in the economy. It sends bad signals. I don't know if any of you know the history of the pirates. One of the things that happened in the pirate era is that some pirates would build fake lighthouses out on the rocky slopes, right, on the reefs and things. And then the other ships would be going by and they say, oh, there's the lighthouse, this is the place, we got to turn where everything will be fine. And they'd crack up on the reefs. And then the pirates would come down and plunder them. Because they were sent false signals. Well, this is what the central bank does. When it artificially manipulates interest rates and changes the real prevailing conditions of money and credit. What are the conditions of money and credit? Well, money has a cost. Interest rates are the cost of money, borrowing money for a period of time. And it has a cost depending on supply and demand. But the Fed steps in and artificially adjusts it, creates artificial conditions of money and credit, and so it creates bubbles. And it could be the dot-com bubble that popped, it could be the housing bubble when they drove interest rates down to about 1%, left them there for a prolonged period of time, created another bubble. These signals of interest conditions are misleading, and especially misleading in the capital structure of production, people that are in the business of production goods, producers of production goods, and so on and so forth. They send false signals, and they create dislocations in the economy. So it's called the Austrian malinvestment theory. People put money in places for which there is not real sustained demand, and at some point the bubble bursts, and then everybody's hurt. And the people that bought the dot-com stocks lost $5 or $6 trillion in America. And the people that bought, well, I don't have to tell you about the housing bubble. We lived through it in this town, but it was created by the lighthouse, created by Alan Greenspan and Ben Bernanke, that said, money over here, and it's really, really cheap. But it wasn't sustainable. So Peter Schiff, a friend of mine who's an investment guy on the East Coast, he puts it this way. He says, suppose you had a little sandwich shop. I don't know, you got, 1,200 square feet, and the circus comes to town. And so every day you're thinking, oh my gosh, there's like sword swallowers, and they're, fire eaters and lion tamers coming in here every day for lunch. I'm going to expand. And so now you'd be at 1,200 feet, now you got 5,000 feet. Thinking, I'm going to open another restaurant next door, maybe a different line. You open another one, and you expand, you make long-term commitments and so on. And then the clowns quit coming in. And what happens? Your business pops. The boom busts. Well, that's what the Federal Reserve does to our economy, and it's part of the critique of the Austrian school of economists to talk about this. And you can tell, I'm more on the investment side of this whole picture, this whole critique, but you can tell, thanks to Austrian school economics, whether you have an artificially manipulated boom or a real bull market. And I'll tell you how you know. If the market is driven by net new capital, by savings, real savings that people have foregone spending and present consumption, and then later they manifest their spending and prices start going up in an area, that's a boom. But if you get what looks to be a bull market that's driven by the artificial creation of money and credit by the central bank, maybe because the election's around the corner and they want everything to look good, that's a bubble. Yep. And we get them from Republicans and Democrats alike. And some people call the Austrian economic theory the malinvestment theory or the business cycle theory. They call it the hangover theory, which is pretty good because you feel real good. You're getting a little tipsy and stuff, and it's good times and parties going on. And people are running around, building more houses than they need. And they got lampshades on their head. And yoo-hoo, it's party time. And then there's the hangover in the morning, and the hangover is absolutely flippin' miserable and it hurts and stuff. But somebody comes around and says, "Well, I know how to cure the hangover. Here, have a shot." And that's what they do. And so, yeah, the dot-com bubble bust, and it threatened to bring down the whole economy, and Alan Greenspan said, that's okay, we'll give everybody another drink, and he filled up the punch bowl again, and it created the housing bubble. And the housing bubble has burst. And Ben Bernanke said, that's okay, we're going to make up for it. And he's created monetary conditions of expansion such as you couldn't believe in this country. Trillions of dollars made up out of thin air. And of course the Austrians will tell you, that when they create this money, it goes to certain favored classes. It's called the Cantillon effect. And in fact, let me even back up and tell you about the Austrian School of Economics view of inflation. Inflation isn't some mysterious malady that just happens like the phase of the moon, the moon's in the 7th house and Venus lines up with Mars or whatever the deal was. Inflation is a consequence of central bank practices. So they increase the supply of money and credit, or I'll give you a better example. Suppose you're all collectors of very fine, well, it's a cheap plastic pen. You're collectors of fine ballpoint or fountain pens, collectible fountain pens, and you come here together in this auction tonight to bid on this very rare, desirable fountain pen that I've held and bring it here to the auction. And let's further imagine that you all have, say, $500 in your wallet to bid for this thing. So the gavel comes down and the auction begins. The auction area is 300, 400, 450, 475, 400, 490. I hear 500, 500, bam. But before he gets to 500, that door opens and in walks a bureaucrat filled with a satchel of the taxpayers' money. And he starts walking around and giving everybody more. Maybe not everybody, it depends. Maybe you're a favored class, maybe you're a crony, maybe you're his party, whatever it may be. He starts passing out the money, and now maybe some of you have $1,000, maybe all of you have $1,000. So the auction resumes, and now there's still, the amount of goods and services available in this auction, like our economy, are fixed. There's still only one pen, but the amount of purchasing media to bid for it has doubled. So the price can go to $1,000, or to put it a different way, suppose tonight the amount of goods and services available in our economy are relatively fixed from day to day, no real big change overnight. Same number of short order cooks doing bacon and eggs in the morning, same number of cars being sold today as tomorrow, same number of people doing all the things, bus drivers driving buses and salesmen selling things and stuff. Everything pretty much the same overnight, same number of baseball bats at the sporting goods store to buy, same number of goods, same number of Kellogg's boxes at the grocery, everything pretty much the same between today and tomorrow, largely the same. But in the middle of the night, some Federal Reserve wizard waves his magic wand and doubles the supply of money. So you wake up and you have twice as much money as you had yesterday. And everybody has twice as much money as they had the day before. Everybody's really happy. Look, I'm rich. But it doesn't affect real wealth, which is the production of goods and services. The amount of goods available in the economy remained the same. Nothing changed. The purchasing media that bids for it has changed, has doubled. And so effectively, when things settle out, the prices can effectively double overnight. Nobody's any wealthier. Wealth is created by production, not by monetary policy in this way. So I'd like to share with you how misleading the state economists have been about things like inflation, and all of this is very well understood, but they will not tell the American people. They don't want you to know. And I'll give you a really vivid example, I think. This comes from the stagflation, the high inflation era of the Jimmy Carter years in the 1970s. And it was on NBC's Meet the Press one Sunday morning, and they had in the administration at the time, the Carter administration, they had a chief inflation fighter. Because they had a problem with inflation, and so they needed somebody to fight it. And so the economics correspondent of NBC News, the guy's name's Irving R. Levine, is hosting the show, and he has Professor Alfred Kahn, the Carter administration's chief inflation fighter, on the show as his guest. And it goes like this. Mr. Levine. In order to cure any illness, one has to figure out how to diagnose the cause. What do you see as the principal cause of inflation? Professor Kahn. I'm going to evade that question because I don't know what the principal cause of inflation is. The essence of what the president has proposed is a multifaceted attack. I think the problem of inflation is so deep-rooted in Western society and it can be attributed to such broad social causes that I think, for example, the inflation that we're experiencing in the United States today is in some important way related to the fact that I see people throw papers on the sidewalk on Pennsylvania Avenue when I walk to the subway. And it distresses me enormously. Or I see them walk on the grass. It has something to do with a sense of being members of a single society rather than, as I have put it, and forgive me for repeating myself, 200 to 225 million people at perpetual war with one another. Now, it was an utter balderdash, and Professor Kahn knew it. And the things that we are told by the governing classes today are utter balderdash, and they know it, but they don't want you to know. Yep. And so it was the Prime Minister of Britain, the guy before Tony Blair, and I can't remember, was it John Major or somebody, one of those guys. When they started having a problem with inflation 7 or 8 years ago in Britain, he said, well, you know, we're going to have to explain to the British housewives how to keep their vegetables fresher in the refrigerator, and they need to seal them tighter. And as absurd as it was even more absurd in the 70s here when President Ford came out with a policy to battle inflation, and he explained to America on primetime TV, I know, I watched it myself, that the problem of inflation was because we were not scraping our dinner plates clean.
Oh, jeez.
And you could help if you would send off to Washington for this little orange button, WIN, W-I-N, orange button called Whip Inflation Down. That would help a great deal. See, so these people want the benefits of increasing the purchasing media, increasing the supply of money and credit, and it benefits the crony classes. It isn't, as in my example, it's distributed, everybody's wealth doubles overnight in terms of purchasing media, in the example I used, the amount of goods and services, but it doesn't work that way in real life. Some people get it first. And the people that get it first get the advantage of the new money before the general price level in the economy is bid substantially higher. Yep. So, one of the shows I did with Ron Paul the other day, we were talking about just that effect. The stock market, as you know, is hitting new highs, but it's lifted on the wings of the Federal Reserve money creation. The Federal Reserve is, you know, buying bonds now with money that they make up to the tune of $85 billion a month, you know, mortgage securities and U.S. government debt, and they buy it with money that they just make up. I'll give you an example. When China funds our debt, when they fund the government of the United States, when China funds the government of the United States, Chinese sell goods in the United States. They repatriate the money or the profits from selling goods. They pay their workers, and they pay the rent and the light bill and the utility bill. Look, all the things that they sold here in this country were made with real goods. Somebody had to dig stuff out of the ground and refine it and turn it into something, and there were, you know, manufacturing process, and it was real labor. People had to leave their farms and go to the cities and work, and they had to work long hours, and they toiled, and, you know, they created stuff, and they were, you know, somebody had to pay for the electricity, somebody had to build the buildings, somebody had to buy the equipment that's used in the manufacturing process. We got real goods from the Chinese people that we bought, and then they took their excess and they bought our bonds, they funded our government, they loaned the money to the United States government, in other words. Now, when the Federal Reserve loans money to the United States government, and the Federal Reserve is the largest entity in the world doing that, the Federal Reserve does it with money they just printed up in the basement that morning. It didn't exist until they bought the bonds. So who's doing something funny in this process? So the money supply doesn't increase evenly for everybody at the same time. And this is what Ron and I were talking about the other day. Wall Street is booming. This massive monetary creation by the Federal Reserve is booming. Wall Street, we're new highs in the Dow and the S&P. You know, the hedge funds are doing great, and you know, the big investment banks are doing great, and it's wonderful, and things are good. Last quarter was the busiest quarter in Manhattan real estate in 25 years. Wall Street is doing great. But as Ron pointed out, we now have 50,000 homeless people sleeping in shelters at night in New York City. Wow. The money doesn't go to everybody equally.
And the central banks know that, but you know, the central bank was created by the banking cartel to begin with. Who do you think they serve?
Jeez.
So, anyway, the other important point in Austrian economics that I'd like to tell you about, and this is one that's particularly important to me, has to do with another malady of all governments, especially the American government today, especially the Republicans. They're really bad about this. Oh, just like the Democrats, though, they're really bad about this too. And it's the problem of central economic planning. And when my first book, The Dollar Meltdown, hit the bestseller list, my publisher was suddenly really anxious to get me to do another book. And my editor started calling, I'm real busy, I don't want to do anything. Finally, one day she called and said, don't you have anything really in your heart that you really want to write about? And I said, yeah, matter of fact, I do. And she said, well, we want to publish it. Let's get it going now. It's just the right time, you know. We get it in process now. We'll have it due out. It'll be out, yada, yada. I said, okay. And she said, what is it? And I said, well, for a very long time, it's true. I could tell you what it dates to. A long time. It's scary if I told you how many years ago it was. For a very long time, I've wanted to write a book called Zen and the Free Market. So I told her. And she freaked out. It's like, what? We're serious publishers of books about, you know, politics and economics and stuff. You're gonna Zen? What weird clap? You're gonna write a book about Zen? And it was just all of a sudden you could just see her backpedaling on the phone. She's, whoa, you know, and he's gonna embarrass me in front of the publisher. I'm gonna have to try to sell him on a book about Zen. And I go, I understand. It's okay, I understand. But the idea intrigued me, and I wrote the book, and it was kind of by subterfuge, but it wasn't called Zen and the Free Economy. It was called Red and Blue and Broke All Over. There was a picture of the shattered American flag. It came out almost a year ago today. Shattered American flag, and they had red and blue and broke all over. The publisher came up with that title, but I thought it was clever. Was that you know, America's bankrupt. Yep. I don't know if anybody knows it, but America's bankrupt, and so that was kind of symbolized on the cover, and the shattered American flag was shattering around the form of a dollar bill. It was very clever artwork. But the other idea was that it's because the Red Party and the Blue Party are also intellectually and morally bankrupt. So, and then I wove through there in a disguised way and without use of any overt terms, I wove in there things about Zen. And how all of this central planning is destructive of our prosperity and our wealth. Well, Friedrich Hayek, the Nobel Prize winner, distinguished a long time ago, got my attention and started me thinking about this, between what he calls a taxis and a cosmos. A taxis is like taxology, taxonomy, you know, it's a structured, ordered system, right? Or a cosmos. A cosmos is a self-arising, spontaneous, self-regulating system. And so central economic planning by the state, Soviet planning and all, you know, Cuban planning, North Korean planning and so on, all of this is taxis. Everything is structured, and, you know, orders are given and resources are directed from on high by the command center. And a cosmos is Zen-like. It evolves of itself. And so I wanted to write about this, and I actually got it in there, to distinguish between a society. Which kind of society do you want to live in? A centrally planned economic society, planned on top, tells you what to do, but it's organized according to the game plan of the commissars. Now, how they're somehow magically equipped to knowing where all the resources should go and what all the people should be doing, we don't know, but that's one choice. Or the other choice is a society of agreement and cooperation in which nobody's coerced into doing anything. You don't do a deal if you don't want to. You don't live there if you don't want to. You don't buy a house there if you don't want to live there. You don't go into this line of work if you don't want to be in that line of work. So this was one of Hayek's important contributions. There's a difference between spontaneously arising human structures. That doesn't mean that they don't involve human intelligence. It just means that they're not planned on high by central planners. Language. Language is the product of human genius. But it's not organized, and it's not centrally planned. by a bureaucrat in the Office of Language and Speaking. But it provides for us in a way that enriches our lives, in a way that you can hardly exaggerate. And then Hayek goes on to make the case, as do other Austrian school economists, that knowledge is diffused throughout the economy. People know about local conditions. Farmers know about when their fields work and when they're depleted better than a central bureaucrat. A guy in the Department of State Transportation may have a PhD in transportation, but the high school dropout who drives the truck back and forth over the mountains, knows better than anybody when it's passable and when it's not during the winter. Knowledge is diffuse. Knowledge of local conditions is diffused throughout the economy. Knowledge is in the hands of thousands of disparate people that have to make economic decisions according to the conditions that they see and perceive at the time. Now, if you're a central economic planner, I guess you could embark on a course of trying to bring in reams and reams of data, burying yourself in data so that you can make wise decisions for the whole economy about where resources should be applied and what people should be doing and so on and so forth. But by the time you get your pants on in the morning, conditions have changed at a million local places. So this is a problem of socialism, of state economic planning, that it can't respond to local conditions. Well, how do we respond to local conditions? Actually, we have a mechanism that for its genius, you would think it was given to us by the gods. We have a mechanism that allows us to plan, and you don't have to be a central economic planner in Washington and buried in data and try to understand every little development, and you can't keep up with the information, and conditions change, and if you're serious about if you're just trying to please, your immediate superior and get a promotion and a bigger salary, that's one thing. You can make any kind of arbitrary economic decisions you want, screw up the rest of the economy. But if you're serious about it, you have to know everything that's going on everywhere all the time. You just can't do it. But you can in a free economy, because you have a little shorthand, and it tells you you don't have to know if there's a drought in agraria, and you don't have to know if there is a flood in Venezuela, and you don't have to know about the strike in Caspiar. Remember Andy Kaufman said, John Carson said, "Where are you from?" He goes, "I am from the Caspiar." But you don't have to know about local conditions there, because all that information is immediately available to you in the price of the goods and services you need. And it allows you to adapt. So in a centrally planned economy, such as the politicians and the bureaucrats always seeking to consolidate power and control over the people in the economy in this country and every other one, all of a sudden, you don't need their decision making, because all that information about the availability of resources is available to you instantly by a kind of shorthand in the prices. And of course, when a central economic planner hears about the flood or the drought or the strike or economic conditions, then he propagates an order. He propagates a limit or a quota or a rationing or an allocation and stuff. And everybody succumbs to this propagation. But in a free, and it hurts some people really badly, and it hurts others less. Some people it doesn't bother at all. But in a free economy, when there's a drought or a flood or a strike, and economic conditions change and the price of goods and services become more available or less available, people can make adjustments according to their own individual needs. And they will pay more for things, some will pay more for things that are more dear because they're essential to their operation, and maybe it'll take them longer time to change over to something else. And other people who don't care, oh, I've got 100 substitutes, I'll do something else, I'll focus my manufacturing in another way, they can make changes too. So everybody can make changes and shift and adjust to changing economic conditions thanks to the price mechanism that serves as a shorthand for agraria and Venezuela and Caspiar and the conditions that are going on all over the world, while the central economic planner is issuing edicts that control everybody and screw everybody up. So free economies enable people to use things according to their own needs. Then there is the other issue of Austrian economics, of Friedrich Hayek's work about central economic planning, which says this basically: you can't have free people You can't have free human beings and a centrally controlled, centrally planned economy. There is a budding conflict in that relationship, and it leads to tyranny. Well, what is the point of having a central economic plan if you can't enforce it? What happens to the central economic plan when you decide not to go along with it? What if you decide to do something else? What if you disagree? What if you have other plans for your life or your resources, your savings? What happens? Then the rubber meets the road, and you find out how serious they are about their central economic plan. And a lot of nation states are very, very serious about it. So others start to wonder, well, how can we, we don't want to start shooting people in the streets, what can we do? And others shoot people in the streets, and they round up merchants. I mean, nobody ever told you that, everybody talks about why did the U.S. lose, why did the West, why did the free world lose China? Well, they don't really tell you that the government of Chiang Kai-shek, who was our guy, rounded up the merchants in the town square and shot them because they weren't obeying his price control edicts. Nobody ever told you that. So that's how we lost them. We lost the support of the peasants, the people, and the merchants, and they rallied around Mao Zedong. And he led them into the Cultural Revolution and deprivation and suffering such as you could barely believe. Because our guy was rounding people up in the town square and shooting them. So a free economy produces, in my view, prosperity. And that's what my last book is about. It's about how to restore America's prosperity. And it can be restored. Where do you get the most dissatisfaction among people? Look, I'll tell you, I have a checkered past. In fact, if I seem like I've been a little out of sorts visiting with you people in Mensa tonight, it's because I spent so many years of my life in talk radio that I'm not really used to being in the company of intelligent people. But I can tell you from being in talk radio what people complain about and talk about most, and the sources of the greatest public friction, and those are the places with the greatest presence of the state. The TSA, airport security, oh my God, because it's one size fits all and it's top-down edicts, and it makes people very, very unhappy. How about public education? There's no greater issue of public friction than public education. Why? Top-down, state-sponsored, one size fits all, mandates, and so on and so forth. How about, healthcare. How about healthcare? Constant source of social friction. Constant source, and it's only going to get worse. Now, where do you see the least friction? Where do you see the most consumer satisfaction? You see it in places that are moving so fast that the stupid state can't keep up. I have a TV in my family room, a big HD TV in my family room, that cost me less than the one I got before. And it's smaller, and it's lighter, and it uses less electricity, and it has a better picture. And it just happened. I have a smartphone that has more computing power than my old laptop. And my old laptop has more computing power than my old desktop. And why? Was it regulation by the state, central economic planning, the direction of resources and engineering skills and mandates? No, it happened spontaneously. It was a cosmos. It was a freely arising event, putting entrepreneurial and inventive spirit to work in the pursuit of things that people just want. Nobody had to tell anybody to do anything. I'll give you a better example, healthcare. Where do you see all the public friction? It's healthcare and costs, and it's all in the big government, big insurance company mandates and paperwork and all of this nonsense that's driving doctors out of the practice and making it impossible to have a meaningful relationship with your doctor and call him up at home at night even though he lives in the neighborhood. And yet you see things that are outside of that insurance, elective kinds of surgeries like cosmetic surgeries or breast enhancement, I get. LASIK surgery. LASIK surgery gets cheaper every year, and safer and more advanced and better every year, because it's not involved in that yuck stuff of bureaucrats. But the whole culture could be that way if we followed the critique of the Austrian school economists. So